the undisputed, most diabolical fantasy villains in the world, Fantasy Brains!
What's up, Brainiacs? Welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Brains podcast. This is going to be episode 3 of the 32-team series, a series where we're going to be going through every single NFL team and analyzing their offense from a fantasy football perspective, going through stuff like the depth chart changes from last year, what the fantasy football forecast is looking like for this upcoming season, what their strength of schedule is looking like, their playoff weather for those week 15, 16, and 17 games. And then also some interesting storylines. So as you can see on my right, we got our whiteboard ready and we are going to be jotting down all these notes so that you guys are as well prepared as you can be for your upcoming drafts this season and can kind of know how we can predict this season. What's really cool about these videos is Charlie and I were able to stat out every single team in the NFL and really look at something like if the Browns are going to throw for 3,200 pass yards this year, that 3,200's got to go 800 to receiver 1, 900 to receiver 2, and so on. So it really is going to add up, and it does give us a more in-depth view of what some realistic expectations can be for the upcoming season. Before we continue, make sure to follow all of our social media accounts at Leatherbrains. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on TikTok. Got a lot of great content all around. And then also make sure to check out our YouTube channel and our Spotify at Leatherbrains. Find all of our episodes. We got a ton of great fantasy film breakdowns on there from the rookies from this class that just got drafted, and then as well as some undervalued and overvalued guys throughout the offseason in a dynasty perspective. But like I said, we're going to be doing the Cleveland Browns today, which is not a very exciting team. This is the third team in the AFC North that we are doing. We started out with the Steelers, did the Ravens after, and now we're going to do the Browns. So I think when you're looking at this team, the biggest thing that you see right away is this team sucks. I mean, looking at the quarterback, you can't even pick a quarterback that you can confidently say is going to start because they genuinely have 4 to 5 options that all give you a different perspective of starting. So I think one thing to kind of remember with this Browns team is someone like me, I'm excited for some of these weapons on the Browns. I like guys like Quinshon Judkins out of Ohio State, and I really like what Jeudy was able to do last year and what he's currently being drafted at. But you do have to look at how good this offense is going to be, and this offense is really not going to be good at all. It's going to be a bottom 3 offense. This is going to be a team that is most likely going to have the first pick in the NFL draft, or again, probably a top 3 to top 5 pick. So last year, you have Deshaun Watson for a handful of games, and then Jameis Winston steps in. Now, Winston doesn't seem like a great quarterback, but what he's always been able to do is throw for a lot of yards and produce fantasy-relevant receivers. And we saw Jeudy be a top 10 receiver under Jameis Winston and finally break out what we never were able to see on the Denver Broncos. So Winston's gone, and Watson is still on the team, but most likely not going to be recovered until mid to late October. So you're talking about a quarterback room of veterans like Kenny Pickett, who's freshly signed off a Super Bowl run as a backup quarterback. You got Joe Flacco from Indianapolis, Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado in the 5th round, and Dillon Gabriel out of Oregon in the 3rd round. So I think, you have this interesting situation where they draft Gabriel 3rd round, but then Shedeur gets drafted 5th round. And you just got to feel for Gabriel because he doesn't really have much of a chance with how good Shedeur actually is as a prospect, a guy that should have gone in the 1st or 2nd round, but also just knowing the media side of it. So I think in this battle with this team, I don't think Flacco really stands a chance early on in the season. I don't see a point in playing him. He's like 38 or 39 years old at this point for a team that is probably looking to develop some of their younger talent. I just think you might as well go with a more mobile option, a younger guy who can spread out the offense. And maybe you have something in a guy like Kenny Pickett, who might have been able to learn under Nick Sirianni and Kellen Moore last year. So I think you're really looking at who's going to be the starter for majority of the season. Is it going to be Kenny Pickett or is it going to be Shedeur Sanders? And I think most likely you're going to see a vet start out in Kenny Pickett. But I think as the season goes on, fans, the media, everyone's going to be calling for Shedeur to come in. Because I'm not going to lie, it's not even going to be Kenny Pickett's fault necessarily, but this team is going to lose a lot of games. Looking at the running back position, last year it was a really weak group. You had Jerome Ford leading the pack, and then obviously you had Nick Chubb, who really was not much after coming off that absolutely egregious injury he suffered 2 seasons ago. So I think now when you have Quinshon Judkins, who in my opinion was one of the most talented running backs in this draft class, If this draft class didn't have guys like Ashton Genty and Omari and Hampton, I think Judkins could have been considered the running back one. I think last year he easily would have been considered as a running back one over guys like Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson. So Judkins comes in. He profiles as a Josh Jacobs type back, in my opinion, where he's going to be able to handle 20 plus touches a game. He's also a very underrated receiver. Now, I don't know how much they're going to use him as a receiver, knowing that they still have Jerome Ford under contract. And they also brought in the fourth round, Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee, who has a good receiving profile. So I actually really like the running back room. I think they upgraded a lot. And I think that Judkins is going to be the bell cow back in this offense, similar to what Nick Chubb was doing a few years back. We look at Judkins as a player who has produced every year of his college career. So definitely really excited about him. Looking at the receiver core, it is pretty much the exact same. We got Jeudy leading the pack. We have Cedric Tillman, who's going to be the other outside receiver, a guy that I am excited to talk more about once we get to the stats part of it. We have Jamari Thrash and Diontae Johnson, who are going to be battling for that slot role. Now, Thrash is a day 3 pick from 1 or 2 years ago. He's kind of an exciting player, but I think they could give him the edge over Diontae, just knowing that, again, this is a team that's not going to be very competitive this year. Why not go with the player who might have more upside, who's going to be on a cheaper contract for longer? So I think most likely you're going to see a combination of Jeudy, Tillman, Thrash, and maybe some Diontae Johnson in there as well. And then at the tight end, you still have David Njoku, but you add the Bowling Green standout, Harold Fannin Jr., who is a massive tight end, and I think who a lot of people would have compared to David Njoku. So unfortunately, this isn't a dynasty video, but if I was, talking about dynasty here, I would say David Njoku owners, you got to be a little worried because now it looks like Njoku, who's going into a contract year, might not return knowing that they have Fannin. So I think for this year, though, Njoku is going to be the lead guy. But let's get on to the fantasy football forecast here, which is what you guys are all waiting for. I got the Browns passing for about 3,200 yards, 19 touchdowns, and about 340 completions. Now, you might say the yards amount seems a little high comparatively to how I was just talking about. They're going to be a bottom offense. But what I will say is they're going to be playing from behind. They're going to be losing a lot of games, which means they're going to be having a higher pass volume. So I think that they could pick up a lot of garbage time yards if they're getting blown out in games. Now, their defense is solid. They have Myles Garrett. They have Denzel Ward. They drafted Mason Graham in the first round. So they might stay in these games, but again, we're not predicting them to be winning. So I think I'm looking at Kenny Pickett having about 1,700 of those yards and Shedeur having about 1,500. And then Pickett having about 12 touchdowns, Shedeur having 7. So kind of splitting at 50-50. I think Shedeur could take over towards the second half of the season. But again, I'm really not excited about either of these options. Even in a super flex league, I think, like I said, Pickett and Shedeur are your top 2 guys that you're going to get, but neither of them have much rushing upside and neither of them have much upside in general. So I would steer clear away from those guys. But I think the most exciting room in this offense is the running back room, like I mentioned. So looking at Quinshon Judkins, I am very, very high on him as a player, and I'm going to be higher than most on him. So I have him rushing for 1,250 yards and 9 touchdowns this year. So I have the Browns offense in general going for about a little bit over 1,800 yards and 15 touchdowns, which isn't anything crazy. I think that's, a modest amount for a team, but the Browns are going to be a more run heavy team and their O-line is solid. So I think that's what they're really going to rely on with a poor quarterback room. So I have Judkins rushing for a ton of yards. I think he's going to have a great season. I mentioned earlier how productive he was in college. 3 straight years. Didn't matter if he was at Ole Miss or at Ohio State or if he had the full workload or was splitting it with Travion Henderson. He had over 1,000 yards and over 14 touchdowns each season in college from his freshman to his junior year. And he enters the league at a really young age of 21. So I think when you're looking at Judkins, he is a can't miss prospect and a guy that they're going to rely on a lot. He could already be the top guy on this offense by the second half of the season. So I think with Judkins, I say 1,250 rush yards, 9 touchdowns. I don't know how much he'll be involved as a receiver, but I think you can expect still some receiving upside with about 20 catches for 200 yards and a touchdown as well. So when you put all that together, I'm expecting Judkins to have about a 1,400, 1,500 season. I have him currently ranked as my RB 13 on the season, and he's going right now as the RB 24. So I am extremely high on him. Now, again, it's going to be tough to really see him hitting these numbers, knowing how bad this Browns offense is. But I do really like Judkins, and I think they're going to rely on him. I think where it could go a little bit south for Judkins is how much or how involved is Jerome Ford going to be? Because Jerome Ford had a solid year last year. And of anything, we have, so I can, read off his statistics here. We got him going for about 400 rushing yards, 2.5 touchdowns. And then I have him also catching 1.5 touchdowns for about, and as well as 25 catches and another 200 yards. So I got him going for about, like I said, a decent, probably a late RB4 in fantasy. I got him finishing as the RB46, whereas he's getting drafted right now as the running back 55. So I think this Browns backfield, this Browns O-line as well, is getting a little bit underrated. And I think that they're going to rely a lot on the run, more than people think. So I like Judkins. I think Ford is a solid option as well if something is able to happen or something does happen to Judkins. But looking at this receiver room, this is where I do see a little bit of excitement as well. And I think we talk about Jerry Jeudy, what he was able to do last year, had an incredible season, top 10 fantasy season, but it was highlighted by Jameis Winston, highlighted by them being down in games. And, they finished with the second overall pick in the NFL draft. So they had the second worst record in the NFL, which means that they were losing a lot of games, which means that Winston was just chucking the ball. Now, Jerry Jeudy, I have him ranked right now as my receiver 31, and he's going as the receiver 30, but I would still consider myself high on him. And the reason is I might have these other guys slightly above him, slightly statted out better than him, but, and those are guys like Devonta Smith or Calvin Ridley, Rome Odunze, guys in that tier of player, George Pickens, guys in that tier. I just think that Jeudy could easily be valued just as high as somebody who's going as the wide receiver 22 or 23, and he's going here as the wide receiver 30. So I think you're looking at a huge tier of players where guys like Jerry Jeudy and like someone like Calvin Ridley are kind of the end of that tier. So I think Jeudy is a really good value because you're getting him a little bit later than that, but he is, in my opinion, giving you that same upside as those 10 guys, or at least 10 receivers being drafted ahead of him. So on the season, I have Jeudy going for about 90 catches, 900 yards, and 5 touchdowns. So I think he's going to have a very solid season. He's having 90 catches, which would be awesome. I think the volume will be there, but the efficiency, I'm not sure it will. Looking at the other receiver on this team, I think Tillman is the only other guy that's truly relevant. I don't think Thrash or Diontae are ever entering your lineups. Even in best ball, I don't think they're really draftable players. So I actually love Tillman. I think that Tillman is a player who's very underrated. I think he shares a similar quality in terms of his size and speed combination as a guy like Nico Collins. And I think, I'm not saying he is Nico Collins, but I think he kind of is that type of receiver, just maybe a worse version of him. And so I think with Tillman, I have him having a little bit of a better season than people might think. I have him going for about 62 catches, 650 yards, and about 4 to 5 touchdowns. So I have him finishing as the wide receiver 62, and that's where he's being drafted. But again, this is the same situation I just talked about with Jeudy. You're talking about the guys that are going ahead of him in the receiver 50 to 60 range. I think he easily has the same amount of upside as all those guys. And that's why I would be willing to take him kind of at the end of that tier. And I think he is a value there. This Browns offense doesn't profile as being a high passing offense, but I think Tillman has the most to gain based off kind of where I'm projecting him. So wide receiver 62, that's not going to be too relevant in a redraft, but I think in best ball as a receiver 5, as a receiver 6, I think Tillman could have some big weeks. We saw in his only 4 healthy weeks last season, he was averaging 18.1 fantasy points per game. So he made some big plays and he proved that he can do well in this Browns offense, but he did get concussed and we weren't really able to see him the rest of the season. So we'll see if he can kind of bounce back from what we thought could have been more of a relevant season from him, especially looking at the second half of it. David Njoku is going to round us out here at the tight end position. We got him ranked to the tight end 9. He's getting drafted as the tight end 10. So we're pretty even on him. We got him going for about 775 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 62 catches. Now, I think the Harold Fannin draft pick is going to interfere with him a little bit because I have Fannin going for about 34 catches, 250 yards and a touchdown. So he's going to eat a little bit into that volume that Njoku thrived off of towards the second half of last season. But I still think, Njoku's a really talented player. He proved that last year. He's definitely going to be the biggest red zone target in this offense. So, 6 to 7 touchdowns for him doesn't seem like that much. But when the team's only scoring 19, I mean, he's putting up almost 35 to 40% of their touchdowns. So I think Njoku is set in for a solid season, but I think people also could be surprised if we could see a guy like Harold Fannin cut into his workload a little bit. I do prefer some of the other options in that tight end range, guys like Mark Andrews, if you can spend a little bit more to get him. I like Evan Ingram more than David Njoku. I think guys taking behind him, such as like Tyler Warren and Dalton Kincaid, provide higher upside than Njoku. I think they provide the same floor as well. So I think Njoku's not my favorite guy at where he's currently being drafted just because the offense isn't very good. But I do think he is a talented player, and I think he'll have a similar role to what he had last year with maybe a little bit less volume. Let's get on now to the strength of schedule and kind of what we're looking like for the fantasy playoffs. So for the strength of schedule for quarterbacks, they have the 28th hardest schedule. So it's going to be brutal for these quarterbacks. We already don't want to draft him, but it is not looking good. And I want to preface this as I have in the last two videos. The strength of schedule is not some huge thing to take seriously. It's all based, of course, on last year and how these defenses were the year before against these positions. So much can change from year to year. Teams are way different. They get new draft picks coming in, new free agents. So don't take this too seriously, but just it does give us a little bit of a perspective on what their schedule could be looking like for the upcoming season. So you have the 28th hardest for quarterback, but then you have the easiest schedule in the NFL for running backs. And that's exactly just adds fuel to the fire of why I'm so high on Judkins, because I think that they are going to rely on the run, especially against these defenses that do not defend well against the run. And I think when you look at the Browns, one of their strengths is the line on both sides. Obviously, the D line with Garrett and Mason Graham and some of the other guys they brought in from the past few years. But you also look at the O line with guys like Wyatt Teller, and they had Joel Bitonio for a while and DeJuan Jones out of Ohio State. So there's a lot of guys that they like on the O-line. I think that's where they're going to really rely on it. So I think having the easiest schedule for running backs just continues to make sense of why the running backs could be the guys to be the most fantasy relevant in this offense and really outperform where they're currently being drafted. Receivers have the 27th hardest schedule, so does not bear well for them. And that might scare you a little bit because I think with receivers, comparatively to a position like tight end, I think it matters a lot more for receivers when you talk about strength of schedule. Because when you're a receiver, let's just say you're a receiver one, Jerry Jeudy, for example. When you're going up against the Denver Broncos, you know that Jerry Jeudy is going to be facing off against Pat Surtain on the other side, because the outside corner is always going to face against the outside receiver. And maybe it's not every snap, but because he might be switching sides, but he's going to be facing him a decent amount. Whereas for the tight end's going to be seeing the safety. They might see the nickel corner. They might see a linebacker. They might even see an edge rusher if the scheme is complicated, such as a scheme like the Vikings or the Eagles. So I think when you're looking at the 28th hardest for receiver or 27th hardest for receiver, that is not looking good. And I just think, sorry, I've been saying 27th hardest, 27th easiest, so fifth hardest or so, but it does make me a little bit more concerned about this offense and the receivers, just the pass game in general. I think that because there is value in guys like Jeudy and Tillman, they could do well, but I think you're going to see a lot of matchup dependent situations with them this season where if they're playing a team like the Broncos, you're going to have to sit those receivers. But if they have a really good matchup, such as like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or the Los Angeles Rams, who don't have great cornerback rooms, then, you feel free to start them. Or if it's most likely going to be a more pass heavy game, that's another good reason. And so for the tight end, they have right in the middle. They're ranked number 18 in terms of strength of schedule this year. So I think for the tight end, again, I mentioned that I don't think it matters that much. I think that with Njoku, with the tight end in general, you're pretty much going to start him regardless. It's not going to matter as much about the matchup. Maybe if you have another guy who's in the same tier, you ride the hot hand, you ride the game script a little bit more, but I don't think you have to look too much into that for the tight end position. Looking at their playoff schedule, Honestly, it looks awful. You have in Chicago, week 15. Now, the Bears, we really don't know what we're going to get out of them, especially come week 15. But you can kind of assume it's going to be a cold weather game. It's going to be a slugfest. This is a game where the running backs are really going to thrive as the Bears have a great secondary. Same with the Bills, where the Browns are going to be at home against the Bills in week 16 and then at home against the Steelers in week 17. So you play two great defenses, two games where you're most likely going to be losing the game. And especially in those Steelers games, I talked about it in the Steelers episode, but a Browns Steelers game is always going to be a slugfest. So I think the playoff schedule is not great, which for anyone in a best ball format, I think that's why those guys on the Browns are dropping a little bit more. I think these I think these receivers such as Jeudy and Tillman are going to have really tough schedules in the playoffs. I mean, the Bears have a great secondary. The Steelers just added Jalen Ramsey. They have a great secondary. They added Darius Slay as well. And then you have the Bills too, who added Hairston in the first round and already a good cornerback room. So I think when you're looking at tough defenses, tough matchups, and all games in the cold, the playoff schedule is looking very poor for this Browns team. But I think before we end off this episode on the Browns, let's just answer some individual kind of miscellaneous questions that could change the course of the season. So I think one thing that we do have to look at is how much do the projections change with each quarterback? So let's say Kenny Pickett does start the entire season. How different is that going to look for guys like Jeudy and Tillman and Njoku than it will if Shedeur Sanders is starting quarterback, or Joe Flacco, or Dylan Gabriel, whoever ends up starting? And I think in my eyes, if you're looking for those players and what's going to be the best situation, it's easily Flacco, because Flacco has been a guy that's been able to prove that he can toss the rock downfield, he can lead an offense, and he can throw for a lot of yards per game. I also like that in terms of the check down ability for the running backs. I think Shedeur is also a great option, another guy who doesn't use his legs as often, and I think somebody who's really going to be willing to air the ball out. I think it's going to be a little bit worse for guys like Kenny Pickett and Dylan Gabriel, who are a little bit more mobile. They might run a more run-heavy offense with those guys, including some quarterback designs. So I'll be honest, I don't think it'll change too much depending on the quarterback, but I think it is clear that if Shedeur or Joe Flacco is the starter in my eyes, I think that's going to be the best case scenario for those receivers, as opposed to guys like Kenny Pickett or Dylan Gabriel starting. And then again, we talked about it earlier, but what do the running back snap shares look like with Jerome Ford being the only proven guy in the backfield? Dylan Sampson, as much as I love Judkins, Sampson is a good prospect, and he was taken in the 4th round. So it does kind of beg the question of maybe Sampson sits for a year while Ford has the 3rd down role, and then they dump Ford and Sampson takes over that role in year 2. Or maybe we see a 3-headed backfield this year, which would obviously not be great for any of the running backs, but especially Judkins. So I'm not too worried about that. I think Ford is more of the handcuff, whereas if Judkins is to go down, he's the guy really to step in. But I think Ford is going to really mix into both the receiving game and the rushing game, whereas Judkins is more going to only play on the early downs, and Sampson is only going to play on the 3rd downs. But hopefully everybody enjoyed this episode. It's the Cleveland Browns, so I don't think anybody is too excited about the fantasy options on this team. However, there are still relevant guys, and definitely guys that can be league winners for you, because you never know what's going to happen in the NFL season. So hopefully you all enjoyed. Let us know in the comments again what else you want us to talk about, whether that's more projections, more previous performances, looking at more stats from 2024 and 2023, looking at more individual matchups, trade pieces if you have those options, where you'd look to get them if they fall, whatever it might be. Leave that down in the comments, and we will definitely get that to you guys for the next couple episodes. Again, make sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts at Leatherbrains. Check us out on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube, as well as the follow on the Spotify to check out all of our content, as well as the Leatherbrains content as well, who does live stream every Tuesday around 6:30 p.m. talking about more real life NFL content. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed this episode, like I said, and we will see you next time to finish out the AFC North with the Cincinnati Bengals. We're out.
3, 2, 1.
Got a blast!
Thanks for checking out the Fantasy Brains. Don't miss next week's episode, Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. See you next week, Brainiacs.